Everyone listen carefully. Why do people settle? Why do men and women, born with the image of God stamped on their spirit, live beneath their potential, tolerate average and call it humility? Why do we negotiate our destiny to fit into the comfort zones of other people's opinions? Let me tell you something very clear. You will never rise higher than the standards you accept. Standards are not rules you write down on paper. They are invisible ceilings you place over your own life. The problem is not that life is hard. It's that you've been trained to expect too little. You've been taught to adapt to dysfunction, to normalize mediocrity, to spiritualize laziness and call it patience. But your current conditions are not your conclusion. They are a reflection of the standards you've tolerated. Every human being was born to lead, but leadership doesn't begin with people, it begins with self. And the first act of self-leadership is to raise your standards. You must refuse to live common when you were born to be distinct. Stop asking people for permission to be excellent. Stop shrinking to fit into environments you were born to transform. When God designed you, He set greatness in motion. But it's your responsibility to say, I will not stay here. There is no change without confrontation, and the first confrontation must be with your own comfort. You cannot conquer what you are willing to accommodate. You will never rise higher than the standards you accept. That truth alone can transform your life, if you allow it to. The standard you set for your life is the silent architect behind every result you see. You cannot consistently outperform your beliefs about what you deserve, what you expect, and what you're willing to tolerate. Life will never give you what you want. Life responds to what you demand by the standards you uphold. Let me ask you a question. What have you decided is good enough in your life? Look at your relationships, your finances, your work ethic, your health. What level have you made peace with? Because whether you realize it or not, you are always living at the level of your standards, not your desires. Desire without standards is like a car without fuel. It looks good, but it's going nowhere. Standards are not loud. They don't scream. They show up silently in your choices. What you say yes to, what you walk away from, what you allow to remain in your environment. If you've accepted chronic lateness, you've built a standard. If you've tolerated emotional abuse and called it loyalty, you've built a standard. If you've stopped pushing to grow because things are okay, that's your standard. Let me give you a real-life example. Have you ever met someone who seems to always keep their car clean, no matter what time of year it is? The vehicle is spotless. You get inside, and everything is in order. Now, contrast that with someone else whose car is always messy. Empty wrappers, soda cans, old receipts scattered everywhere. These are not simply habits. They are reflections of internal standards. One person has decided, I don't live in disorder. The other person has decided, this is just how it is. Here's the truth. Neither one is wrong. They're simply living according to the standards they've set. Apply that to your relationships. If someone constantly disrespects you, dishonors your time, and violates your values, yet you keep allowing access, you are not a victim of that relationship. You are a co-creator of it. Because what you tolerate becomes your norm. And what becomes your norm begins to define your life. The standards set the boundaries for your future. Think about a thermostat. It doesn't just measure temperature, it regulates it. If the temperature drops below the set point, the system kicks in to raise it. That's what your standards are supposed to do. When your life starts to fall below the level of who you know you are, your internal thermostat should push you to adjust. But if you never set one, or you set it too low, you'll adapt to environments you were never meant to stay in. So many people ask for breakthrough, but they don't change the level they're operating on. They want promotion, but still practice procrastination. They want influence, but don't invest in discipline. You cannot ask God to bless a life you're not willing to elevate. If He gives you something greater, but your standards are still average, you'll sabotage the blessing to match your comfort zone. Raising your standards means taking full ownership. It means saying, I will no longer live beneath what I was created for. And the moment you say that with conviction, not emotion, but with a decision, everything around you begins to shift. No one drifts into greatness. You rise because you refuse to stay where you are. Your current reality reflects the standards you've tolerated. Look around you. Your environment, your habits, your relationships, your results, everything in your life is echoing what you've allowed. Nothing changes until you stop accepting less than what you were designed for. This is not about blame, it's about responsibility. Responsibility is not guilt, it's the power to respond. And the truth is, you have been responding to life at the level of your standard. We like to say, I deserve better, but what you truly believe is seen in what you tolerate. If you keep showing up to a job that drains you but never challenge it, if you stay in friendships that drain your peace but never speak up, if you live in financial struggle but keep repeating the same spending patterns, then the reality you're living in is not a coincidence. It's a mirror. It's reflecting you. What are you allowing that you secretly resent? That question will expose the gap between your potential and your reality, because resentment is a signal that something in your life has fallen below your internal standard. But instead of raising it, you've chosen to live with it. You've chosen to call it seasonal or temporary, or even worse, normal. But whatever you refuse to confront, you've chosen to accept. Imagine you're in a house with a leaky roof. Every time it rains, water drips through the ceiling. At first, you put a bucket under it. Then you start avoiding that room. Over time, you just live with it. The house is still standing, but it's decaying. And not because the leak couldn't be fixed, but because you chose to tolerate it. Now that roof becomes symbolic of every other area where you've made peace with discomfort. You see, the danger of low standards is not just that they keep you in pain, it's that they cause you to adjust to pain. You stop expecting joy. You stop demanding excellence. You start saying things like, at least I have a job, or at least I'm not alone, or it could be worse. That's how people with purpose start living like survivors. But what you don't challenge will eventually define you. Think of an athlete who trains daily. Every session, they push their body to new limits. Why? Because they refuse to accept weakness as normal. They have a vision of who they must become, and they raise their standard to meet that vision. But if that same athlete started skipping training, eating poorly, ignoring their discipline, what would happen? The results would reflect it. Not overnight, but slowly, surely, the reflection would shift. Not because they weren't talented, but because they lowered what they were willing to accept. It works the same way in life. If you tolerate chaos, don't be surprised when peace feels foreign. If you tolerate being misunderstood and never speak up, don't be shocked when people keep crossing your boundaries. If you accept lack as a mindset, opportunities will avoid you because preparation will always meet expectation. You attract what you are prepared for, and you prepare by setting a new standard. Your standards create your culture, and your culture becomes your future. So if you want to see a different outcome, don't just chase new goals, set a higher standard and refuse to drop below it, because life is always taking notes on what you settle for. Self-leadership begins with raising your personal standards before you can lead anyone else. Your family, your business, your ministry, or your community. You must first lead yourself. And self-leadership is not about charisma or confidence. It's about discipline, decisions, and standards. You cannot guide others to a level you refuse to demand from yourself. We often admire people in leadership positions, but true leadership doesn't begin with a title. It begins with internal mastery. And the foundation of internal mastery is the refusal to live below the level of your calling. You set the tone for your life by the standard you place on yourself, what you allow, what you prioritize, what you pursue, and what you protect. Ask yourself this: would you follow you? Would you follow your example of time management? Would you follow your commitment to growth? Would you follow the way you speak, the way you think, the way you handle pressure? If not, then why are you asking life to promote you when you have not yet promoted yourself? You see, leadership is not an event, it's a lifestyle. And lifestyles are formed by standards. If your standard is excellence, your life will eventually reflect excellence. If your standard is average, your life will never rise above convenience. That's why so many people stay stuck. They want elevation without accountability. Let me give you an example. Think of a thermostat again. A leader is like a thermostat in any environment. They don't just reflect the temperature, they set it. When a true leader walks into a room, the atmosphere shifts. Not because they say something dramatic, but because their presence carries weight. Why? Because they've trained themselves in private to hold a standard that does not drop, no matter where they are. Self-leadership means saying no to excuses even when no one's watching. It means making your bed not because someone told you to, but because you've decided your life will not be ruled by disorder. It means reading, studying, praying, preparing, not for applause, but because your future is too important to approach casually. Have you ever seen someone so disciplined that their life commands respect without a single word? That's not luck. That's not personality. That's self-leadership. And you don't arrive there by accident. You arrive there by decision. Many people want influence but don't understand it begins with integrity. You cannot influence others to rise while you're making peace with your own slackness. You can't mentor anyone with authority if you've never conquered your own procrastination, your own fear, your own inconsistency. Influence flows from inner alignment. When who you are matches what you say, your voice carries power. But when your standards are low, your influence becomes noise. Raising your personal standards isn't about being perfect. It's about refusing to stay passive. Passive people wait for someone to rescue them. Leaders build habits that protect their vision. They correct themselves before anyone else does. They raise the bar and hold themselves to it. And here's the truth. If you don't lead yourself, someone else will. If you don't set your own priorities, the world will assign its agenda to your time. If you don't create standards, you'll become a servant to whatever is trending, urgent, or popular. You were never meant to live reactionary. You were created to live with intention. And intention only becomes reality when it's backed by self-leadership. So before you ask for more, before you desire elevation, promotion, or recognition, ask yourself this one question. Have I raised the standard on me? Stop shrinking to fit into environments you were born to transform. You were not created to blend in. You were created to bring change. But too many people silence their uniqueness to make others comfortable. They lower their standards to avoid confrontation, dilute their vision to gain acceptance, and compromise their values to maintain peace. But here's the truth. What you conform to, you lose the power to transform. When you walk into a room, something is supposed to shift. Not because you're better than anyone else, but because you carry something that environment needs. But when you shrink, when you downplay your calling, ignore your convictions, or stay silent in the presence of disorder, you deny the very reason you were placed there. Let me ask you, how many times have you seen something wrong, broken, or unjust, and you felt the nudge to speak or act, but you held back? Not because you didn't know what to do, but because you didn't want to be too much or make waves. That's shrinking. That's surrendering your assignment to maintain comfort. And you can't transform what you're trying to fit into. Think of a seed planted in soil. The seed does not adapt to the dirt. It breaks it. It forces itself through, reshaping its environment as it grows. It doesn't apologize for expanding. It doesn't second-guess its design. The seed transforms the space it's in because it knows what it carries. You are that seed. But if you keep adjusting your growth to match the size of the pot, you'll never become the tree you were destined to be. When you walk into a toxic workplace, you're not supposed to become toxic to survive. When you enter a faithless environment, you're not supposed to lose your faith to relate. You were sent there to inject a new standard, not to adapt to the existing one. But this requires courage. Raising your standard will make some people uncomfortable. Not everyone will celebrate your conviction. Some will label it pride. Others will try to test it. But your job is not to be accepted. Your job is to be effective. Real leaders never settle for being liked at the expense of being impactful. Look at history. Every major change agent, from Moses to Mandela, from Esther to Martin Luther King Jr., had to walk into environments where their very presence disrupted comfort zones. But they didn't shrink. They didn't say, let me lower my voice so others don't feel insecure. They said, let me raise my standard so others can rise with me. You don't need permission to be who God created you to be. Stop waiting for others to validate what heaven already confirmed. If your presence intimidates those who are committed to staying small, that's not your problem. It's their mirror. People will often resent in you what they've refused to activate in themselves. So here's the challenge. The next time you enter a room, ask yourself, not how can I fit in, but what did I bring that this place needs? You are the thermostat, not the thermometer. Stop taking your temperature from the room. Set it. Your gifts, your vision, your voice. They were given to shift things, but they can't do that while you're busy pretending not to have them. Don't shrink. Don't settle. Don't silence yourself to maintain spaces that were never meant to contain you. You cannot conquer what you are willing to accommodate. The moment you start making room for something that does not belong in your life, you lose the authority to change it. You can't defeat what you're still entertaining. You can't overcome what you've decided to live with. Change requires confrontation, not comfort. And most people don't lack the power to change. They lack the courage to confront what needs to go. We say we want freedom, breakthrough, and elevation, but we keep making excuses for dysfunction. We wrap laziness in "I'm waiting on God." We justify toxic relationships with everybody has issues. We tolerate cycles of inconsistency and call it just a rough season. But here's the truth. What you excuse, you empower. Imagine a person who has a wild animal in their home. At first, they're afraid of it. They keep it in a cage. But over time, they begin to feed it, play with it, give it space, Eventually, that animal is no longer in the cage. It's roaming freely, making a mess, destroying the house. Why? Because it was accommodated. You don't tame danger by tolerating it. You conquer it by drawing a line it can't cross. The same goes for negative habits, toxic thinking, and low standards. If you keep feeding it with attention, it will grow and take over your life. You can't pray away what you refuse to put boundaries on. How many things in your life are you calling not that bad just to avoid the work of facing them? Maybe it's a job that drains you but pays well, or a friendship that keeps crossing your values but feels familiar, or a mindset that keeps repeating, "This is just who I am." These are all accommodations. And every time you accommodate something beneath your potential, you delay your next level. Your destiny cannot be built on compromises. Real growth demands eviction. There are things, habits, people, and patterns that must be evicted from your life if you ever plan to live at the level you were created for. But most people try to add a new level without removing the old ones. They want to grow while still holding on to everything familiar, but you cannot step into purpose with your hands full of excuses. Think of it like climbing a mountain. Every new level demands that you carry less. The air gets thinner, the terrain rougher. You have to drop unnecessary weight to keep going. If you try to carry every burden, every opinion, every old mindset, you'll collapse under the pressure. The climb requires letting go of what no longer fits your elevation. So ask yourself, what have I been making room for that's robbing me of my next season? What cycles have I normalized in the name of patience? What dysfunctions have I renamed to sound spiritual? If you're going to raise your standards, you have to get brutally honest about what you've been tolerating. Nothing in your life will change until you become uncomfortable with staying the same. Accommodation is the language of stagnation. It whispers, "Just let it be," while it slowly builds a life that betrays your purpose. But the moment you say no more, heaven aligns with your decision. Power follows clarity. Authority follows confrontation. You were not created to manage what God gave you the power to master. So raise your standards, not just for success, but for significance. Refuse to live one more day beneath the level of who you truly are. Your life will never rise above what you're willing to accept. So make the decision today to demand more from yourself, for yourself, and because of the purpose that was placed inside you. Transformation begins the moment you stop settling. You were born to lead, to lift, to shift atmospheres, not to blend, not to shrink, and certainly not to accommodate what was meant to be conquered. Thank you for listening, and may you walk boldly into the future that matches the standard of your destiny. Good luck, and remember, your next level is waiting on your decision.